Lagos, man. Lagos, it just hits you like a jolt of energy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This city, it's like it's on fast forward, constantly moving, growing at an unbelievable speed, and it's becoming this megacity right in front of us. But, and I'm sure anyone who's been there would agree, that kind of insane growth comes with, well, some pretty big urban challenges. And I think the one that probably screams the loudest is the traffic.
It really is a fascinating case study in how cities evolve so rapidly. And, you know, for this deep dive, we've got this amazing collection of sources that you, our listeners, sent in. We're going to go way back to the very beginnings of Lagos, its history, then really get into the details of its urban development, and then look at some of the, I guess you could say, almost futuristic solutions that are being considered.
Yeah, exactly. The whole point of today is to give everyone a solid understanding of Lagos, where it came from, the pressures it's facing right now, and what the future might hold. So where do we even start with a story like this? I feel like to really get Lagos, we need to go back to the beginning.
You're absolutely right. And it all starts with the land itself. See, the early settlement of Lagos was really shaped by its geography. I mean, it wasn't just one big chunk of land. It was this mix of dry areas, swamps, creeks, and of course, those lagoons.
Right, those lagoons are iconic.
They are. And you know, that network of waterways is actually why the Portuguese, when they came, they renamed it Lagos. It's a direct reference to the lagoon system.
Wow, so the name itself has that connection to the water. I never realized that.
It does. And before the Portuguese, the sources we have don't really highlight a specific name it went by. What they emphasize is that the island itself was really the heart of early human settlement. Even though it wasn't very big, it became a densely populated center really early on.
And that island, that's still basically the core of Lagos today, right? Like
Yeah.
Lagos Island, Ikoyi, those are still major areas.
Exactly. That limited space really dictated how things developed early on. Now, something that undeniably impacted Lagos in a really negative way, while also shaping its growth, was the transatlantic slave trade.
A dark chapter for sure.
It is. But like many parts of the world, it brought wealth to the ruling powers in Lagos, and it really strengthened the Oba's authority. The wealth, while horrific in its origin, really shifted the power structures in Lagos and created these lasting inequalities.
Yeah, that makes you think about how much those early dynamics still play a role today.
Absolutely. And it's not just about external forces acting on Lagos. There was this back and forth, like with Bahia in Brazil. That connection was really strong, and it was mainly facilitated by these African officials who were working with the Portuguese ambassador. They actually went on to become the founders of what were called Brazilian families in Lagos.
Wow. You don't hear about that connection very often.
Yeah.
It shows that Lagos wasn't just being acted upon, it was part of this exchange.
Exactly. And as you can imagine, with all this change in power and wealth, the political landscape was, well, not always peaceful. There were periods of serious conflict, especially when it came to who would rule. Like one of the sources talks about this fight after the death of Olugun Kutere. His sons, Adel and Osilokun, they went to war over who would take control.
Sounds intense.
It was. And then we see the British entering the scene. At first, it seems like they were mostly focused on trade, setting up these trading wharfs, basically. But towards the end of the 19th century, things change. They start building more permanent structures, trading houses, missions, even a British consulate. And this presence, well, it made the locals curious. Some oral traditions even talk about how people thought it was strange that the British consulate wasn't in a more prominent location.
I can imagine people wondering what they were really up to.
Right. And then the big moment happens. The cession of Lagos Island to the British in 1861. That's when control officially shifted.
A turning point. And after that, we start seeing all these repatriates coming back to Lagos. People who had been taken to places like Sierra Leone, Brazil, and Cuba. The sources specifically mention the Acasus, or Asáros, from Sierra Leone, and the Agudas from Brazil and Cuba.
That's right. And when you think about how diverse Lagos is today, a lot of that goes back to these people returning, bringing their skills and culture with them.
And their impact is still felt today.
Absolutely, like the Agudas. They were mostly Catholic, and they were known for being skilled artisans. And the Asáros, because they had adopted Western culture earlier in Sierra Leone, they later became important figures in the cultural nationalist movement in Lagos. But interestingly, the dominant white society, they were kind of disappointed with the Asáros, even though they were Western educated.
So even within those groups coming back, there were these complex dynamics.
Absolutely. Now, even though the island was the starting point, Lagos didn't stay there for long. Around 1901, it started expanding beyond the island, incorporating areas like Ebute-Metta, Yaba, and Ikoyi. And the city's boundaries kept growing for decades, settling around 1950. And underneath all of that was a huge population boom.
So this small island settlement was exploding into a massive urban center.
Exactly. And that brings us to, I think, the next really important part of the story. The challenges that come with that kind of rapid growth. And one of the things that really comes through in the sources is this tense political relationship between Lagos and the federal government. It goes way back, often because Lagos was governed by parties that opposed the ruling party at the federal level.
And that kind of friction at the top, that has real consequences for people on the ground.
It does. The sources point to that as a reason why it was so hard to manage Lagos, to provide infrastructure, to get basic services to people. There was even this time in the early 2000s when the federal government withheld monthly allocations that were supposed to go to Lagos State for a long time.
Yeah.
And then on top of those political issues, the speed and the way Lagos grew, it just put huge strain on its infrastructure.
That's got to be a major problem when you're trying to deal with that kind of growth.
It is. And the sources really emphasize the strain because a lot of that urbanization wasn't planned. There's a quote from 1974 that stuck with me that basically says Lagos hadn't necessarily grown too big for its capacity at that point, but the lack of planning was already a serious problem.
So it's not just about being too crowded. It's about growing without a real plan.
Exactly. And that lack of planning, it shows up in a lot of ways. One of the big ones is waste management. The sources talk about irregular trash collection, and they use these stark terms, scenic blight and health hazards.
Not a pretty picture. And with that many people, I can only imagine how tough waste management must be.
You're right. It's a massive task. And then there's the issue of informal settlements. They often have high unemployment, something like 25% in some areas, and a lot of people living in poverty.
And these settlements, are they a direct result of this uncontrolled growth?
To a large extent, yes. You have people coming to the city looking for opportunities, but if there isn't enough affordable housing and a plan for how the city will grow, you get these informal settlements popping up. And then, of course, we have to talk about the big one, traffic.
Oh yeah, the Lagos traffic. Anyone who's been there knows what we're talking about.
For sure. It's become like a defining feature, and it's a major consequence of the growing population and also, maybe surprisingly, growing affluence. More people can afford cars, which means more cars on the roads. And the sources talk about a whole bunch of factors. Cars breaking down, accidents, traffic lights that don't work well, and everyone going to the same areas for work.
A perfect storm of traffic mayhem.
You could say that.
Yeah.
And it's not just trash. The sources talk about other environmental issues, like historically they tried to control mosquitoes and rodents, which obviously are a bigger problem in crowded cities. And when the population grows so fast, things like health services and social support, they struggle to keep up. So all these challenges they've been building for a while.
They have. So where does this recent problem of just insane traffic gridlock fit in? Was there like a specific moment when it got so bad?
You know, the sources we have don't talk about specific recent incidents, but I think the important thing is this terrible traffic we keep hearing about, it's not new. It's been getting worse for a long time. And it's directly linked to all the things we've been talking about. The population boom, the lack of planning, the problems with infrastructure. It's like all of that has created this situation where even small disruptions can cause huge traffic jams across the city.
It's not just a traffic problem. It's a symptom of all these bigger interconnected issues.
Yeah.
So what are people doing about it? What kind of solutions are out there to help Lagos become a truly sustainable megacity?
Well, the good news is people realized a while ago that they needed a plan. One source talks about this master plan that they were working on back in the 1970s, which shows that they knew they needed to think strategically about urban planning. And more recently, we've seen some pretty impressive transportation projects, like the BRT, the bus rapid transit system.
Yeah, I've seen those buses.
Right. They have a lot of buses running on these dedicated lanes, and they even use a contactless payment card called the Cowrie card. Oh, and it's important to remember there are both BRT buses and the Lagos Bus Services Limited buses, the LBSL ones, working to make public transport better.
So has the BRT made a difference? With the traffic, I mean.
I think it's definitely given people a more reliable, high-capacity option for getting around. But the challenge is so huge, it's just one piece of the puzzle. Another big project is the Lagos Rail Mass Transit System. They've launched the Blue Line, which uses electric trains, and recently they inaugurated the Red Line. These are massive infrastructure projects, building on existing lines like the Lagos Ibadan line.
The rail lines seem like a really positive step, a real investment in the future of the city.
I think so too. And it's not just about getting people around, it's about creating these integrated transport hubs, like the Oshodi Transport Interchange. It's a modern center that connects different types of transportation.
It sounds like they're starting to think more strategically about how everything fits together.
They are. And Lagos is also looking at its waterways. They're developing ferry services and building modern terminals like the Five Cowries Terminal. It makes sense with all the lagoons and creeks to use those for transportation as well.
So buses, trains, ferries. It's a multi-pronged approach, which is good. Now, one of the more high-tech solutions that really stood out to me was this idea of a digital twin for Lagos. What exactly is that, and how could it help?
That's where things get really interesting. A digital twin, think of it like a virtual copy of Lagos, a model of the city and all its infrastructure, roads, buildings, utilities, everything. And that model is constantly updated with new information.
Okay, so I can kind of picture this virtual Lagos, but how does that actually translate into solving real problems, like the traffic?
Well, one of the big things is simulation. With a digital twin of Lagos infrastructure, they can run these complex simulations to test things out. Like, let's say they're thinking about a new road design or changing how traffic lights work. They can test it out in the virtual environment first to see how it affects traffic flow.
That's amazing. You can test things out without actually causing chaos in the real world.
Exactly. And it goes beyond just traffic. Digital twins are also being used in construction to help make the industry more sustainable. They can help reduce waste, make better use of resources, even spot potential problems in buildings and infrastructure before they become serious. So it's not just about building new things, it's about managing what we already have in a smarter way.
That makes sense. And our sources also talk about other ways that technology and AI can help Lagos. One that stood out was intelligent transport management systems, or items. What exactly are items?
Items use sensors and data analysis to keep track of things like traffic flow, where parking is available, and even how people are moving around the city. The goal is to create a transportation system that's smarter and more accessible.
So it's about using tech to create a more responsive system that can adapt to what's happening.
Right, and there are some really interesting applications, like one of the sources talks about emergency management. By using items to help clear traffic, you can get emergency services to people faster.
That's a powerful example. I mean, in an emergency, minutes can make all the difference.
Absolutely. And when you're designing these systems, the sources point out that there are two main types of requirements to think about: functional and non-functional. Functionally, they need to be easy to use, provide real-time information, and make it easier for people to get around. Non-functionally, they need to be reliable, secure, and able to grow with the city. And importantly, they should also encourage people to use more eco-friendly transportation.
So it's about the whole picture, how technology fits into people's lives and the environment.
It is. And there's this initiative called Metacities. They have a really smart approach. They say you have to understand the regional dynamics, the social and economic factors, and the existing infrastructure. Basically, you have to understand the context of Lagos. And they really push for collaboration between different experts, from scientists to industry people, social scientists, and government folks.
It sounds like a really holistic strategy.
It is. So when we look at all of this information, what do we see? We see a city, Lagos, shaped by this incredible history that's now facing this huge period of growth. It's dealing with major challenges, a lot of them because of how quickly and sometimes how haphazardly it's grown. But we also see this amazing potential for innovation. There are all these ideas for how technology, data, and planning can help create a better future for Lagos.
It's been a really fascinating look at Lagos past and present. So with all this, the history, the problems, the potential solutions, what do you think is the most crucial factor for shaping the future of Lagos? What will determine if it can really become a thriving megacity? And what are some of the unexpected things, good or bad, that might pop up as Lagos adopts all this technology?
Those are really important questions. And for you, our listeners, the biggest question might be this. Now that you have this deeper understanding of Lagos, its history and the challenges it faces, and you know about all these amazing technological solutions, what do you think is the most crucial element for determining its success? What kind of unexpected hurdles or exciting possibilities do you see emerging as Lagos integrates all this technology into its own unique urban fabric? It really makes you think.